Hey everyone, this is Pete, and welcome back to Atari A to Z Flashback, an exploration of the games that make up the Atari Flashback Classics collection on Nintendo Switch. So today's game is Avalanche, a game from 1978, which might look familiar to you if you've been a long-standing fan of Activision games, particularly on the Atari 2600. So Avalanche is a game that's very simple in concept. As you can see from the demo mode that's currently running, all you've got to do is just catch the falling rocks on your series of paddles. And that's it. Let's have a go. So, this is a game that is controlled with a paddle. So, in the case of the Nintendo Switch version here, this makes use of the analog controls. By default, it uses absolute controls, which means that the position on the screen is directly in accordance with where the analog stick is. So that means you can respond very, very quickly to incoming threats and move across the screen very quickly. But it also, if you're not used to this style of control, it can feel very twitchy and difficult to use, so it takes a bit of getting used to. There is a relative control system as well, where you move sort of more conventionally, push left to move left, push right to move right, and so on. But in this kind of game, in the old paddle control games, so a paddle, if you're unfamiliar, was a control system where you had a dial that you could turn left and right. It was one of the earliest analog control systems. Where you weren't just pushing left or right, you could sort of proportionally move left and right to varying degrees. Yeah, it takes a lot of getting used to if you've not come across it before, but once you get a feel for it, it becomes second nature before long. Now, the reason I brought up Activision to begin with is those of you who are familiar with Activision's output on the Atari 2600 in particular, as well as the Atari 8-bit computers, you may well be familiar with a game that they put out called Kaboom, which was one of their very popular games. It was a very simple game, but a very well-known and very well-received one. Now, Kaboom was actually a completely unauthorized adaptation of this game. So it wasn't developed in accordance with the original developers. It wasn't licensed from Atari or anything like that. It was just purely put out by Activision as a means of a home port. Avalanche didn't actually get a home port until a bit later. And even then, it didn't come out in the same way as a lot of Atari arcade ports did with their cartridge-based releases on the Atari 8-bit and on the consoles. It actually came out through the Atari Program Exchange system, which is how we got games such as Dandy and so on. So these were sort of consumer-developed games that were just happened to be published by Atari. So it was an early example of a similar kind of thing to what companies like Square Enix are doing now with their collective system, which is sort of taking contributions from the community and providing them with a much wider audience than they would otherwise be able to attain if they were just self-publishing. And so Atari kind of missed an opportunity there to publish an arcade game. Avalanche was by no means one of their most well-known arcade games. I actually didn't know it existed until I came across this compilation, to be perfectly honest. I was much more familiar with Kaboom prior to that. But yeah, it's a good one, and it's a shame that the official adaptation didn't get much attention. Although Kaboom was a great game, it would have been nice to sort of see the source material for it get some acknowledgement, if you like. And although it's an incredibly simple game, it's rather enjoyable. It's got a hypnotic quality to it. And that's one thing that Atari's old arcade games here are very good at. They're very good at that sort of feeling of you getting into the zone, sort of feeling the flow. And just feeling like there's mechanics for you to respond to, skills to master. So obviously in the case of Avalanche here, the main skill to master is making use of those paddle controls and getting a good feel for how you can move, how you can be accurate, and how you can be accurate under increasingly challenging circumstances. As you probably notice, as you progress through the game in this, you get fewer paddles in that big stack that you start with, and also they get smaller as well. So you have to be more precise and more accurate as you progress. So in many respects, this has quite a bit in common with games like the Breakout series as well, which also made use of variable size paddles according to skill levels, had different game modes, got more challenging as you went through by increasing the speed. And obviously, of course, Breakout also made use of paddle controls in the same way, so a skill that is essential to master if you want to get into this era of gaming at all. As you can see, it's not something I've entirely mastered myself either. Oh, particularly accuracy in those bits that are sort of part way across the screen is always quite difficult. One tip that I found, if you are playing one of the adaptations on console, like this Nintendo Switch version, is rather than just trying to move left or right, if you sort of move your controller around the perimeter of the extremities in a sort of semicircular motion, you'll find it much easier to get those sort of in-betweeny positions and directions. Because that way it's much closer to how the original paddle worked. So you won't find yourself just lurching from extremity to extremity and not being able to really respond to what's going on. But yeah, this is Avalanche. Like I say, not a game I was very familiar with prior to taking a look at this compilation for the first time. But it's one that I'm glad I've discovered now, because although it's simple, it's very addictive, very enjoyable, and quite hypnotic. Especially when you get into a good flow like I did there. It's not going to last for much longer though. I also like the sound in this. Not so much that horrible beeping noise when when you lose one, but the sort of gradually growing rumble in the background is a really pleasing sound effect. All right, let's have one more go at this, and then I will spare you any further incompetence. Here we go. This one's the big one. I assume something happens when you clear the whole screen, but I don't know if that's ever going to happen. This beginning bit, perfectly easy, perfectly fine. It's when you get to the end of the row of blue ones, and your paddles shrink and you have fewer of them. That's when it gets a bit more difficult. I guess sort of the key skill is to observe the order in which they're falling and kind of follow a path. Plot yourself a nice path from rock to rock. Because if you just try and respond to individual rocks rather than the overall pattern, you'll find yourself struggling a bit. And with the nature of the controls, it is possible to get from one side of the screen to the other very quickly. Alright, we'll leave that there for now. That was Avalanche from Atari in 1978. A paddle-controlled catch-em-up, if you like, which went on to later inspire, to put it politely, Activision's Kaboom on Atari 2600 and Atari 8-bit computers. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please help out the channel by leaving a like or a comment and subscribing. New episodes of Atari A to Z are on Tuesdays and Atari ST A to Z on Thursdays. Check out atariatoz.wordpress.com for a full archive. Do please also check out my other projects moegamer.net, where I explore Japanese and Japanese-inspired games from yesterday and today, and videopackgames.wordpress.com, which aims to catalogue the small but well-formed library of the Philips G7000 Videopack computer, also known as the Magnavox Odyssey 2. You can also support my work on Patreon or buy me a coffee. You can find links to do both down in the video description. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.